Okay, it's 2 o'clock. I'm going to call the meeting to order. Thanks everyone for being here. Appreciate your time and effort. We've got a fairly light agenda today, and I've asked the Fisheries Department to give us an update on the latest fish survey results. So Chris Fuller is going to do that for us today. But before going to that, any additions to the agenda that you have in front of you? Okay. Approval of the previous meeting minutes. Can I get an approval for the minutes from last month? Approve. Second. Okay, thank you very much. Board member comments. Any comments from anybody? Okay. All right. Yeah, I am too. Tom, do you have any comments?
I defer all my time to Chris.
Okay. Rick, are you ready to give your report?
Sure.
Okay.
Again, we want to take every opportunity to remind folks of the drawdown. This October will be the start on the 16th and will allow the lake to return to normal beginning on February 19th in 2024. This marks about 3 weeks early on both ends, so just so folks are aware of that. POA ranger contacts for the month of July were 6,117. Actually down a little bit from June and from the previous year in July. If you remember, we had that, it's not too far in the distant memory, but a couple weeks of really hot weather, we limited the exposure of our guys to the water during the hot part of the day. So that's the reason for that. Undergrounds maintenance, we're seeing quite a few trees blowing into the lakes that the guys are removing. We've had issues at Tanyard Creek on Lake Windsor, Loman, and Rayburn just in the last few days. Most of this was we were able to sink as fish habitat, so that's the positive. We have also installed 4 new man-made fish habitats on Lake Ann in the last couple weeks. The guys are continuing with dock repair work as it presents itself, and we're going back and sealing those jobs once we're complete. The rangers are actually fully staffed for the first time in quite a long time. In Department 480, which is our Lakes Ecology and Fisheries Lab, the catfish are doing very well in the aquaculture ponds, up to about 10 to 11 inches. They're ready to go to the lake now, but we'll wait till the water cools off a little bit. We did have spawning of our bluegill, which I reported last month. The fry from that are about 1 inch long now. They've got a ways to go before we put them in the lake, but hopefully before cold weather we'll get those out. One of our fishing tournaments produced an 8.15 pound largemouth bass recently, which is the largest I've heard of in a fishing tournament. And we met with the Fly Tyers last week regarding projects that they might be willing to help us fund for 2024. That's my report.
Okay, thanks very much. Any questions for Rick on any topic or?
Which lake was that 8-1 caught on?
Specifically,
Loman.
They're all in there.
Loman, yeah.
Loman.
And so you would say that based upon your report, I would say that, or I can assume or infer that your ponds are working and they're productive and they're probably saving us we're being more productive with our resources.
We are. They're doing quite well. We went through that really hot period without adding any fresh water at all, and they were doing fine. Of course, catfish can tolerate warmer weather, but just recently, over last weekend, I flushed them pretty good, and so they're in good shape.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Good.
To add to your total, there was a six and a half taken out of Loman last weekend.
Nice. Yeah.
Cool.
And I know where it was.
You know where it was, and you're going to keep that to yourself.
It's marked.
Yeah.
Okay, I also sent out, before we get into the Chris Fuller presentation, I sent out the 2024 capital budget recommendations. Anybody have anything new or anything to add to that? We've kind of beat this one with this kind of dead horse, I think. We kind of beat it to death, but if anybody has any comments or questions or concerns or.
So one of those items was to put a kayak rack on Rayburn, which is the lake that we don't have anything on.
Right.
I don't see how that would be feasible based on where our common property is, but if anyone has any ideas, I would love to make that work.
Even at the end of the dam, at the turnaround, in that little park area down there, that wouldn't be feasible?
It's possible, but kayaks today are pretty heavy. I would prefer to get them as close as we can to the water. We could potentially make that work, but that's the drawback.
Right, it's a long way to go.
Mhm.
Yeah, okay. Anything else from anyone on projects? Again, I just keep a running list here, and as people send me things or we think of things, I'm just updating that list, and then I think we need to turn it in by August.
I got a quick, is there any discussion ever or comments about maybe fuel on Windsor? I know we have it on Loch Lomond, but is that anything that does that go well on Lomond? Is it kind of a wash?
That's been looked into in the past, and we looked at it from two perspectives. One's putting like a kind of a manned station there that seemed to be cost prohibitive, bang for buck. Also talked about having a fuel truck come on site once a week or something for a given period of time. That also seemed kind of cumbersome. So that's kind of where it was left. Not to mention that, offloading there by the boat ramp or wherever it would happen to be, the threat of spillage and that kind of thing. It's at the time we decided against it. Of course, we can always entertain new ideas.
Anybody else? Kevin? Scott?
How often are we inspecting the water supply at the fish cleaning stations? Are they all operable?
We fix them when we notice that there's a problem. That we currently on Lake Brittany are down.
Yeah.
Because the batteries are not functional, and we have had those ordered for some time, and they're supposed to come in this week. Do you know anything about that? Okay, they're supposed to be here this week, and we'll put them back in as soon as we can. But
they're at times they're iffy.
Yes, they are. Yeah.
And it's nice to have fresh water to clean it up and,
Absolutely.
make it nice for the next person that's gonna use it.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of fish cleaning stations, is having one at each lake feasible since we're trying to get people to keep more fish? I mean, it's something to look at in the future.
If I'm remembering correctly, there is one at every lake.
Is there?
For
accessible, I mean, usable?
No, Avalon's got one on the dock.
Oh, that's right.
On the heated dock, yeah.
Avalon's got one.
There's one at every lake, and
Or additional ones that
yeah, and that was one of the items we spoke about when we met with the fly tires, and they would like to have one at Tyree. The issue there is there's only one courtesy dock, and we don't want to have the fish cleaning station right at the courtesy dock because it gets a lot of continuous traffic, and so it would require either a land-based cleaning station where the waste would have to be collected daily and removed, kind of like Windsor or Lake Ann at the head of the lake, I would personally like to stay away from having to man those buckets because, you know, they can go a couple days without being used, and then when the fish are really biting, they can need a change out in an hour. So it becomes a nuisance and a smelly kind of thing. We're entertaining possibly one at the dam on Windsor as well, which there's plenty of docks, there's deep water. The remains can be placed back in the lake. So
Just something to think of.
Yeah.
Okay, tell you what, while we're on this topic, do we have, let's open it up to guests before we go to this presentation. Anybody have anything, any comments, questions, concern from the audience? Okay, if you don't mind, step up to the mic and state your name, and you've got.
I'm sorry, I wear hair aids and I don't have them. They broke, they're in the shop.
Okay.
So, might need sign language. Okay, my name is Wendell Stevens. I've lived here since '04. In fact, I'm the one that saved the fishing house when the BOA was going to tear it down. I'm the one that came and got the newspaper and all that and got back, or we wouldn't have it now. It would be an open dock like what's on Lake Ann. I want to know what's going on. I have a 7-year-old. She wants Papa to take her fishing. She's too short to cast over your railing. So I was looking to fish on the bank someplace. It's all full of trash. You bring something in, you're pulling seaweed up or whatever you want to call it, moss, and that it never used to be that way. And it's got me upset on that. And I've talked to several other people saying, you've got too many small bass in the lakes that's eating all the food, so the other ones can't get big enough. You need to take some of the small bass out. And my thing is too, you're putting too many predators in the lake. The walleye, the stripers, the wipers, you call them, or whatever. I've seen them eating trout out of Lake Brittany. Like right now, you cannot fish the dam on Lake Brittany. It's all overgrown. The BOA used to cut the grass on that. It looks like junk. And then you put a limit on how many people that can go on those fishing docks, or multi-purpose docks, what I've been told. What, to 5? You have a person, a grandparents that live here, let's say, and then their son or daughter comes down, so that's 4 adults, and then they got a couple of kids, you're over the limit. I don't understand that. I used to be able to, the photo ID, bring as many people down as I wanted to. I mean, I would do it within reason, but if you go back, if somebody wanted to really go by the rules, you'd have to kick that grandparents off and the family with those 2 kids, so that'd be 1 over.
Okay.
You know, it's just these things like this. I know you're changing because of the bicycles and the BBs or whatever they are that's going to be able to use our lakes and all that stuff, which I think a lot of it, that I went to the POA meeting, I heard all this money going out for 7 trails, but nothing coming in. They're not doing nothing. They don't have a 5-year plan. So the community's getting younger, but I was asking where the schools are going to be. Okay, they said that's Bentonville's problem. You know, we're a community here now. You need to take care of what's going on. I can't get a campsite here anymore, so why don't they build a couple of campsites up in the Highlands? To me, it'd be a cheap thing, and you could get money for them like that. People coming into camp, and you would keep them here in Bella Vista. That's basically where I'm going. I just wanted to know if they cut your budget, or why the lake has got so much moss in it, or whatever.
Okay, we'll, your time's up, but we'll try to answer some of those questions for you. Rick, do you want to take a shot at some of those? Particularly, some of the things he brought up are not lakes related, but some of them are, so.
Right, so the vegetation, we tend to cycle through vegetation issues.
Right.
We're actually for the most part in a downtrend. The rooted vegetation is almost non-existent.
I had 2 back surgeries and neck surgery, and I tell people I just got retarded 2 years ago, okay? But this has been going on for a few years, and my balance is off, so that's why I haven't been going. And I'm just driving down to see where I can take her, and I can't find a spot really where to take her where she can enjoy going fishing.
Pontoon Park is a good place.
Down off of, on
Windsor.
on the backside?
Yeah, that's where I personally take my kids.
Okay.
The dock regulations that you spoke of, I believe that there was some misunderstanding there. We are limited to 5 guests of a dependent, okay? And so you're not restricted at all. There's not like a number limit or a weight limit or anything like that on the docks. That was done a few years ago to kind of curb some of the partying and the riffraff, the heck raising of some of our youth.
Okay. Okay, I have another question too. I drove down to Lake Avalon. Okay, there's no sign out there telling you where the fishing house now from the street. It's been knocked down or whatever. Same over there on Kingsland, about the other lake over there. But I like to, when I use that lake mostly when it's cold or whatever, crappie fishing inside and catfish at night. When you lock the gates, I have a handicap sticker where I'm allowed to pull on the dam. Well, it says to call the ranger. If I'm catfishing, okay, I'm gonna go over there probably around dusk, and I'm gonna stay to 10, 11 o'clock at night. Is a ranger gonna come back and let me out?
Where there's a ranger on duty until 10, generally.
But I'm saying, that's limited me. Before I could use it 24/7.
True. Some of the issues that we routinely have kids racing up and down the dam, drag racing. We have kids climbing onto the building and
Right,
jumping
jump
off into the lake.
I've seen that.
So we had to make a decision based on safety. Safety's first. And
I know they threw trash cans in the lake, so the next time I come there, they're chained up inside the house.
Exactly.
I've seen all that, you know, but.
We had to err on the side of safety, and in some situations it kind of it curbed what you could do. And it's generally seasonal. The gate stays open during the fall and winter and spring. It's only when the swimming season that it's closed.
Well, see, that's the winter season. That's when I go.
Sir, your 3 minutes is up.
Okay, I'm
so,
sorry. But like I said, the winter season when I go, because some of the lakes are frozen, that's the only place you can go.
Sir, do you have anything to say?
Yes.
Okay, come on up.
Can everybody hear me?
No, you gotta come to the mic.
Oh, you're not gonna be able to read that sheet.
My name is Eddie Bateson. Been here, my wife and I, for 7 years, living on Loch Lomond. And Matt.
It's me.
Matt, you got my email.
I did.
I just wanted to express my concern about the fisheries on Loch Lomond. We got here about 7 years ago, and the fisheries was phenomenal. It was great. I could go out and fish the boils. I could go out, fish the banks with rubber worms. I had spawning grounds for my red ear. And over the last 7 years, I'm here to tell you that the fisheries has decreased. The quality of fish and the fishery opportunity on Loch Lomond has decreased. And I've given Matt an opportunity. I'm a wildlife and fisheries biologist, and I think that there has been some issues that need to be addressed by the Lake Committee to bring that fisheries back to Loch Lomond. I don't know about Windsor. I don't know about any other lakes because I don't really fish them as much, but I do know that Loch Lomond's fish quality has decreased. You don't see those big girth bellies anymore on your 8-pound, whoever said there was an 8-pound or whatever pound bass. Those are thin bass. Those are thin largemouth bass because there's no shad in Loch Lomond anymore. We used to in the morning see these shad just jumping on the surface of the water, and these bass have a tendency to boil them at the very surface and they feed on them. And those shad don't exist anymore because I think the quality of the habitat has decreased. Now, I've, over the last 7 years, seen these boats that have these 12-foot span things that spray something in the water to decrease the amount of forage vegetation. People want clear water, people want the weeds away. 2 weeks ago, somebody was dumping bags of fertilizer, algae, I think it was algae fertilizer, into the water. Whatever's happening, and I don't know what's happening, Matt, but whatever's happening, the quality of fisheries in Wapelloman has decreased.
Okay, I'm gonna let Rick, our biologist, answer those questions.
So, fertilization is done to augment the amount of phytoplankton in the water, which is the basis of the food chain, which brings on zooplankton, which then the smaller fish eat, thereby feeding the larger fish. So the fertilization is a positive for fish production. A couple of years ago, we noticed parrot feather in the lake. And that stuff expands its range really quickly. It's an invasive species. So we pulled out all the stops to try to eradicate that. In doing so, we've cut the native vegetation way back. We feel like we've gotten rid of the parrot feather. We haven't seen it in a couple of years now. So the intention is to let some of the native vegetation come back. And in order to do that, we will actively go out and electrofish and remove some of our grass carp that were stocked to do the job. We've got some places to put them, other places to put them. And so that's going to be a process. 2-3 years ago, our data will show that the relative weights of the bass in the lake were on a tremendous upswing. Even the 12 inchers were football-shaped fish. The vegetation does provide habitat for small fish, which will allow them to get big enough, and then the larger fish will eat them. It's going to be a process to get that back, but with the vegetation will come back in time, and we're going to actively remove the grass carp to allow that to happen. But the reason for that was that the presence of the invasive weed in the lake. It has a domino effect on everything else. But we think we're past that. Okay?
Thanks for that explanation.
Okay. No problem. Sir, do you have anything in the back? Okay. All right, any other questions for Rick or anybody else before we move on to John's presentation, or Chris's presentation, sorry. Okay, with that, Chris, you're on.
Check. Good afternoon. As mentioned, my name is Chris, and I'm going to be talking to you about the largemouth bass data from our spring electrofishing sample. All of this data, including the graphs, can be found on our website under the Things to Do tab, the Lakes heading, and the Fisheries page link. Our analysis for largemouth bass consists of 5 different parameters. The number of 12 to 15 inch fish, these are what we call eating size. The number of 15 plus inch fish, the larger or preferred size fish. And the number of 20 inch fish, these are the very large trophy size fish. In addition, we look at the number of age 1 fish. This is basically recruitment, or the number of new fish that we're bringing into the population. And finally, we look at the length of age 3 fish. This represents growth rate, or how fast the fish are growing. Here we have an example graph. At the top, you'll see that we have a title, which is the lake and parameter. Here it just says "and largemouth bass." This represents the total analysis score, but it could be something like "and LMB age 1. On the x-axis, we have our time in years. On the y-axis, we have the value of the graph. Here it's simply analysis score, but it could be something like length at age 3, or it could be the number of fish caught per hour. The line with dots on it in the middle of the graph is our data. The long overlapping line is the 10-year average. The short overlapping line is the 3-year average. And that's what we'll be focusing on today, is the 3-year average. Finally, in the background, you have a color scheme with some labels. Here we have poor, fair, good, and excellent. So these are just the qualitative ranges of those numbers on the graph. Some changes from previous year are that we have accounted for the overcrowding of fish mentioned by one of the members here today. We understand that there are too many small fish, and I actually gave a presentation on this fact this past November. So I mentioned that we were going to rework our analysis scheme, and this is what has come of it. So for the 12 to 15-inch fish, you'll notice that we've added 2 categories above excellent, which are crowded and overcrowded. The rest of the analysis scores have changed a little bit to account for this bigger change. Each lake will have 2 slides. We'll do and first. On the first slide, you'll have the large fish, 15-inch plus, in the upper left. You'll have the 20-plus inch trophy fish in the upper right, and you will have the 12 to 15-inch eater fish in the lower left. In the lower right, you will have the text description of what the graphs are telling you. And this, again, is focusing on the 3-year average. So for N, you can see that over the past couple of years, we've had a decline in larger and trophy-sized fish down to about the poor fair border. And we definitely have some overcrowding of eater-sized fish. And I'll give you a moment to take that in before I move on. The second slide for each lake will contain recruitment in the upper left. This is the number of age 1 fish. Growth in the upper right, length at age 3. And finally, in the lower left, you will see the overall analysis score. So for Ann, we have good recruitment and excellent growth. And that counteracts the size structure from the previous slide, bringing our overall score for Ann in the good range. They are based on ecoregion data, largely pioneered by Tennessee, is that right? Kentucky. The Kentucky Game and Fish originally came up with this scheme, but we've adjusted it slightly for our own conditions. For Avalon, we have fair numbers of large and trophy-sized bass, and we have almost too many eater-sized bass. You can see the average is right there on the border of crowded and overcrowded. But that value is coming down, which is a good thing. For recruitment and growth, we are in the excellent category. In fact, there's so much recruitment that it's not even on the graph. Overall, the score is in the good range and seems to be improving. For Brittany, we have fair numbers of large bass and a fair to good number of trophy-sized bass. For those who have fished here a long time, this probably is not too much of a surprise. You can see that it used to be chocked full of trophy-sized bass, but that has since come down. We're not really sure why that is. We also have an improving number of eater-sized bass, which may be accounting for our loss of larger size bass because we have more smaller bass, which is not necessarily a bad thing. For recruitment and growth, we have poor recruitment, but good growth. And overall, this leads Brittany at the fair to good border of overall score.
And we had large numbers as recent as, say, what, 6, 7 years ago? Any speculation on what that might be? I mean, you don't know for sure, but do you have a clue that, are people keeping trophy bass, or the trout stockings having something to do with that, or what?
It could be a little A and a little B. It could be that the last 4 or 5 years we've just not hit it at a good time, and therefore we aren't getting the bass like we used to, because we just kind of have to take our sample when the weather allows us to. So it may just be that we're offbeat with the fish in their availability at the shoreline, because when we do our electrofishing, we have to electrofish along the shoreline. So we're no more than 5 to 15 feet off of the bank.
So can I interject something? So the whole trout program started in 2010, 11, somewhere.
Yes, just about
9. And so the trout are a food source for larger bass. And so you see in the early part of that, you see the response was the large fish. And it's speculation, but word gets out. And the lake is a small lake. And I think that fishing pressure has had something to do with that. A lot of people will catch and release those large fish, and I'm not sure that they're all living. When you catch large fish, hooking mortality is higher on those. And I do know that one of the preferred methods is using live bait, and they'll tend to swallow the hook. And so I think the mortality is higher there, and I think we're seeing that. Between that and increased fishing for the larger fish, I think has resulted in that. Hopefully we see a rebound soon.
For allotment, we have a excellent score for larger fish, but only a poor score for trophy-sized fish. And we have come down from the overcrowding of eaters down to a excellent score on the 3-year average.
If I had to guess, that would have been exactly what I would have thought. People would keep them. Well, but even the eaters we're going in the right direction on that. Right. And it does have a good. It feels as though the population of those 15 inchers is very healthy.
Lomond also has excellent recruitment and growth, and has a good overall score, which is on the rise, probably due to the decrease in overcrowding of the eater-sized fish, allowing more trophy-sized fish, and better recruitment and growth amongst the new fish. For Norwood, we have poor numbers of large fish, both 15 and 20 plus inch, and we only have a fair number of eater-sized fish. We did have a point not too long ago where we seem to be improving, but it has come down again. Recruitment is good, while growth seems to be only fair, leaving the overall score in the lower fair range.
It probably doesn't get the fishing pressure that a lot of the other ones get.
It does not. My personal pet theory is that I think it's a topology problem. Norwood is a very steep-sided lake, and there's not really a lot going on until you get pretty far back to the head of the lake, and then it's just really muddy back there. And I'm guessing that there's probably not enough good spawning habitat for the bass and bluegill, coupled with probably a poor population of crayfish, leading to the poor growth scores on the lake. That's my guess. John and Rick, you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'd say he's exactly correct. That lake is not, it's never been incredibly productive from a chlorophyll standpoint. I think you'll probably agree. But the deep and the steep sides of that lake, and most lakes are like this, when they're deep and steep, you just don't have an incredible amount of growing habitat space to grow your crop in. You don't have a lot of that great preferred ground. So it's hard to make a fishery in an environment like that.
For Rayburn, we have poor numbers of larger fish and fair numbers of trophy-sized fish, however. We went from a period of overcrowding down a little bit too much. We are sitting at the bottom of the excellent range. Hopefully this turns up in the next year and we stay in that excellent range. For growth and recruitment, we have excellent recruitment and growth. Overall, this places Rayburn in the good zone. So hopefully Rayburn takes advantage of this burst in recruitment and growth and leads to more larger fish. For Windsor, we have seen a decrease in the larger fish down into the fair zone. We've also seen a general decrease in trophy fish from the excellent to the fair zone. But we've seen an increase in the number of eater-sized fish, leaving us in the excellent to crowded zone. Almost too many, but still at a good place. And finally, we have excellent recruitment and good growth, leaving the overall score in the upper middle of the good range. And that is all I have for you. So if you have any questions, feel free.
One more. How old is a 6 to 7 inch bass?
Not old. It's about 1 year. So, fun fact, fish's birthdays are January 1st every year. So it could only be 8 months old, but we call it a year old. So from about spring to spring, that's about a 6 or 7 inch fish.
So on the high side, if you had the most opportune growing the best growing opportunity, could a fish grow 10 inches a year, 12 inches a year?
Yeah, I mean, in optimal conditions, it's entirely possible to, if you have a really long growing season and ample food for every size class of bass, you could get a pretty big bass very quickly. I'm not sure what the literature says on optimal growth rates, but I'm guessing it's probably in the 8 to 10 inch range for spring to spring.
More specifically than Bella Vista, though, based on our growing season and our...
Yeah, I would say probably 6 to 7 inches is probably about as good as it's going to get.
Yeah, that's really good. Like on Lake Brittany, which is the one lake we don't fertilize, the first couple of years are very slow growth, as you would expect. We've had fish that were like 2 inches long that were a year old. That's kind of done on purpose because that's our trout lake. If we were to fertilize and create a lot of productivity, we would limit our trout habitat. Also, there would be more bass there, and they would put more pressure on the trout that we do have. So low numbers and large size is the goal for the Brittany bass population.
And I would say that Windsor is just loaded with that 7 to 10 inch, or just a boatload of those out there.
Are any of the lakes stocked with Florida strain largemouth?
I believe
They
Daryl
generally get
did
bigger.
that in the past, and there's something like 10 to 15%.
I'm not sure that they were ever meant to be, especially Daryl. I don't think they meant to stock Florida strain. Not
It
any
might have
biologist
just
that's worked for
Been included.
Bella Vista. Some may have accidentally been stocked in the past by whoever was stocking. We do know, and I know we've got a genetic report on some of our larger fish that came from Brittany that have, and I think you just said the number, 15% of Florida genetics among some of those fish. A lot of northern strain more than anything, but.
Second question, is shad and or crawdads stocking a feasibility to help out the food?
We have tried in the past to stock threadfin shad to no avail. It seems the gizzard shad is the dominant shad species. The problem with gizzard shad is that they're not a good food source for bass. In certain conditions, they can be. If you are down in the deep south, where the waters are shallow everywhere in a water body, and there is ample nutrients to stimulate the plankton population, the shad will spawn constantly, and you'll have a bunch of eatable size gizzard shad this big, which is perfect for a bass. However, in our lakes, the conditions are not conducive to shad spawns, and so there's not that many shad spawns to go around. And the terrible thing about shad is that unless you have a bass to eat them immediately, they're going to get too big to eat. Several years ago, I did a presentation, or one of our technicians did, on the shad problem, and the fact that after 5 or 6 months, just born in the spring to the start of winter, you can have a shad get to be the size of my palm, which is just on the upper limit of what a bass can eat. So as soon as it goes through the winter and gets another spring, it gets out of the food bank. So again, in certain situations, gizzard shad are a good food source. In our situation, they're terrible, which is why we stock bigger predators like wipers and blue catfish, because not only are they a terrible food source growth-wise, they're also in the wrong location. Because largemouth are an edge species, so they mostly stick around the shoreline, whereas gizzard shad only come into the shoreline at dusk and dawn to go back into the coves. But most of the time they spend their time in the middle of the lake, which is where the wipers and blue catfish hang out. We have considered doing some kind of stocking for crayfish in the past. And if you don't know, we did do a diet study on our lakes a number of years ago, and we found that virtually the entirety of the largemouth bass diet is reliant on crayfish. I mean, it was almost 100% of the diet until you got into the late summer, in fall, when we do have the occasional shad spawn, then they would start to eat the shad, but it's almost entirely crayfish.
I'll say two things. I have never cleaned a fish that I've caught in Bella Vista that didn't have a crawfish in its belly. Never, ever. I've checked every one. They've all got, if they don't have a full crawfish, it's a pincher or whatever. And then my last question is, about a year or two ago, Grand Lake in Oklahoma put a new species of bass. I forget what it was called. I might have sent you the article, and it was a new strain. Any thoughts on how that's done, and would that be applicable to us at some point?
The problem with introducing anything new, a bass species, is getting them established, getting them in the numbers to make a difference. We are at the latitude where the northern strain of largemouth bass does the best. Having some southern genetics mixed in is fine, like we have in a lot of our bigger fish show those traits. But I'm not sure that I don't remember the strain. I'll look it up.
Yeah, it was a couple of years ago. It's
Yeah.
been a couple of years now.
Yeah.
Is there any opportunity to perhaps stock crawfish? Or is that?
So
We're awfully close to
Yeah.
Louisiana.
right. The crawfish that exist in our lakes will reproduce and do fine when we can get some vegetation back.
Okay.
I think that would be money
They need
wasted.
that
I
habitat.
think that would be money wasted to throw something like that into the lakes. But we're gonna get that vegetation back, and they'll take care of
Then
themselves.
maybe we can get some crawfish.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
On a side note, it would have to be the correct species, because I think Game and Fish would have a huge issue with us importing a non-native crayfish. That's something that in recent years has really become an issue, where we have non-native crayfish that just come in and wreck the environment. So I think unless we could get the correct strain of crayfish, they wouldn't allow it anyway.
And how could you be sure that you're 100% pure? Yeah.
Any other questions for Chris on his presentation? I think it was a really good overview. Anybody else?
Chris, where is that on the website?
Yes, sir. We will go back to the beginning here. If you go to bellavistapoa.com, there is the Things to Do tab up there, and then under the lakes.
That's old. It's not that anymore.
Oh, it's not that anymore? All right, well, if just search for lakes or fishing, search for fishing, and it should bring you to that right page.
All right, thank you.
All right, Chris, thanks very much. Appreciate that. That was a good presentation. Eddie, you have, your question was appropriate because you got to see exactly what we're kind of dealing with.
Yeah, I understand that now.
Yeah.
I don't know why the vegetation was ever taken away, and so I appreciate the explanation. It's a cycle. It's gonna come back, I'm
Yeah.
sure, though. It's a little discouraging for a battling man like me that can't go big battle.
I understand. I feel your pain, so just feel free to drop in anytime. So with that, does anybody else have anything else to talk about or bring up or before we adjourn? Going once, going twice, meeting adjourned. Thank you.